Welcome back to another episode of Work Comp Talk. My name is Carmen, your host for today's podcast, and joining me today is also Bilal Kassem, president and co-founder of Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers, Northern California's top workers' compensation law firm. And of course, we are sponsored as well by Pacific Workers. So if you have yet to check them out, make sure you go online at pacificworkers.com. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast, this is the time for you to do so. And of course, share the word. If you know anyone who can actually benefit from any of our podcasts, make sure you share as well. Subscribe to our YouTube channels. We are everywhere on social media. Today's a bit different, and it's something we haven't ever done. And it was really exciting to do this because we get to intersect the worlds of medicine along with law. This is something we've never done before. I was never introduced to CISMS up until this event, and who best than Bilal himself to tell us a little bit about what we dived into when we were in San Diego and we had this great opportunity to connect with the doctors.
So CISMS is an organization for doctors, by doctors, really to bridge the gap between law and medicine. You know, the workers' comp system is somewhat unique in that there's a huge crossover between the two.
Right.
And there's a lot of involvement between the legal world, judges and lawyers, as well as medical providers and evaluators in the work comp stuff. And so I think to some extent, you kind of have to know a little bit of everything. You know, we as lawyers, in order to be advocates for our clients, have to address issues with doctors, which means to some extent we have to be familiar with the medicine component to it. And the doctors, the same way, have to address legal issues and medical legal issues in the case. And so they have to be familiar with what the laws are in workers' comp. And so we always have these seminars and things put on by doctors, I think a lot in workers' comp for lawyers, where you have orthopedic surgeons, psychiatrists, neurologists, people coming to educate us on surgery and medicine. But there's not a lot going the other way. And so organizations like CISMS play a huge part in helping educate and get doctors on board with legal components that they may not necessarily be, familiar with, or just, not really to a level of detail they would have otherwise. And so it's a great organization. It stands for Society for Industrial Medicine and Surgery. And it's a great organization, and they do good things.
It was amazing to be a part of, and as a matter of fact, Bilal Kassem was actually chosen to be on the panelists to be one of the speakers at this event. And of course, there was a lot of questions thrown out there. There was a lot of, which surprised me. You know, I'm not the lawyer, I'm not the doctor. I took it as if I was the injured worker, and I know that the doctor that is essentially going to be treating me or qualifying any of my medical needs in my case is asking the type of questions that I was hearing at this type of event. It just gets me very excited to know that doctors are backing up, and getting associated with an attorney who knows their stuff, and they're working together for my benefit as an injured worker. That's how I took it. I hope that with the information we're going to be sharing in today's podcast, you get an insight, you get an idea as to how these two worlds combine, how they actually work together to benefit the injured workers. So one of the questions that was being asked there was, can doctors really be patient advocates? They need to be for the injured worker. I would have never put those two together, like doctors being patient advocates. Their job is to essentially help the injured worker out. But Dr. Navani actually shared some great insight when it came to this question.
Yeah, so I think the issue in workers' comp is that there's a lot of red tape legally that puts the doctor at odds with what their oath as a physician is. You know, the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, and that's their oath to basically help people and be true to their role as a physician at all times. Mm-hmm. Well, workers' comp is this system, and it's got legal rules in place, and it's a lot of red tape for the physicians because they can't just go and give anyone and everyone the treatment that they feel that person actually needs. They have to submit things like request for authorization. They have to fill out the right forms. They have to submit the right forms at the right times. And it's not so easy for them. And so I think just in the role of a treating doctor, they have to cut through that red tape. And that's just generally different than their role as a QME. But yeah, Dr. Navani had a lot to say about this. Dr. Navani is a fantastic physician. She's both a treating physician and a qualified medical evaluator. So I think she does have kind of a unique perspective on this.
Speaking about the red tapes, what are some of the problems with workers' comp for the injured workers?
From the legal side of things, it takes time. The system's set up in a way that it's not advantageous to get things done quickly. When you request a hearing, for example, it takes 30 plus days. Once you get a hearing on calendar, you may not even get a decision that day if there's an issue. Getting to a QME in the first place can take months. Getting to a treating physician can take several weeks, if not longer. And then even when you're there, maybe the doctor can't even do what they want to do because they have to request authorization and that's denied. I think the doctors have a different perspective than the attorneys do because we mainly deal with the legal side of things, even though there is that crossover. And Dr. Navani had some really good insight on some of the things that she sees from her perspective as, I guess, the pitfalls and issues that injured workers are going through the eyes of her as a doctor.
So obviously there is a lot of problems dealt with on the law side and on the doctor's perspective as well. One of the questions I was asked to Dr. Navani while we were at this event in San Diego was what kind of reform they would like to see in the future. As much as you guys as lawyers want to see different changes, I'm sure they as doctors have a lot of say as well. This is what Dr. Navani had to share with us.
Hey, this is Bilal, Kassem, managing attorney at Pacific Workers, and today we're here in sunny San Diego. It's CISMS 37th annual conference, and I'm joined today by the one and only Dr. Navani.
Nice to be here, Mr. Kassem.
Thank you for having us. Tell us a little bit about CISMS.
Oh, CISMS, what can I say? It's an amazing organization. It is the only organization that represents physicians practicing industrial medicine. And we have this year actually gotten a little bit into personal injury as well. I know that for a fact that physicians who treat injured workers and personal injury patients don't really have any representation in terms of how to offer care, the quality of reports to write, or even advocacy on their behalf. So CISMS fills that void, both from the treatment and medical legal perspective.
Awesome. And so where does CISMS interact with workers' comp?
So CISMS is the foundation for education, mentorship, and advocacy for physicians who practice as treating physicians and medical legal evaluators for workers' comp.
That's fantastic. And would you say that as a doctor in workers' comp that you're able to really be a patient advocate as you need to be?
Absolutely. I think everything we do every single day and every single moment in a clinic is for the patients. We want them to get better. We want them to have a good quality of life. We want them to get back to work and be productive members of the society, get back to being who they were before the injury. So no matter what we are, or what specialty we are, I should say, or how we practice medicine, if we are physical therapists or psychologists or MD doctor, the goals are exactly the same: to get the patients back to where they came from.
And being a physician on the front line in the system, where do you see some of the shortcomings or shortfalls for the injured worker these days?
I think access is a big one, where injured workers are not able to find doctors of different specialties in the panels where they can go and treat. So MPN gets to be a real issue, and I think we need to take steps to get that. And CSIMS through advocacy efforts is focusing on that being one of the measures. Also, variety of other things. Just you and I both are in Northern California. The cost of living have gone up. Inflation is definitely here. And it's really become hard for physicians, especially in private practice, to be able to sustain practices with, the insurance rates not having gone up for reimbursements, the infrastructure costs having gone up, and just being difficult for the physicians to sustain and survive in the practice. So I think those two are key features that, are facing the physicians now. But other than that, so many other things: medical legal, access, and even like specialists who are available to be able to treat these patients. They're shrinking in numbers. Even the QME doctors are shrinking in numbers in terms of workers' comp.
Absolutely.
So lots of challenges. I think those are the top that came to my mind.
Absolutely. And where would you see the most reform, or where would you like to see the most reform over the next 12 months to 5 years, would you say?
I'd like a reform most in the realm of access. I think the injured workers are already at a disadvantage because their lives are not the same after the injury, and they have so much to deal with because workers' comp is one of the most complex systems we know of. There is one patient surrounded by so many different stakeholders that they have to work through. They have adjusters, and they have case managers, and they have attorneys, and they have doctors, and they have multiple other people influencing their case, and the whole course of the case. And sometimes they are directionless. And in face of that, not having a provider to be able to go to and be able to talk to about their problems and get proper care, it's a big issue, I feel. So I think I'd love to see good access for the patients, where these patients can easily have a group of providers from any different specialty that they want, where they can get the treatment in a timely fashion and be able to get well.
Absolutely.
So we also got to catch up with Dr. Lawrence Weil, who is a fantastic pain management physician who works out of the Walnut Creek office of Boomerang Health. And Dr. Weil is both a treating physician and a qualified medical evaluator, which means he not only sees patients for just evaluation, but he's there on the front lines actually trying to give them the care they need. And unfortunately, I think that requires a lot of balance. And both serving as a QME and a treating physician, his role can be different at times. And so he had a really, he had a lot of good insight about what it's like to serve in each of those roles.
Well, the difference, a lot of people don't understand, the difference is when you're treating a patient, when a physician is treating a patient, the physician is treating the patient, saying what's medically in the patient's best interests, trying to fix what ails them. A qualified medical examiner or an agreed medical examiner is completely different, and we're basically taking a snapshot and saying where the patient would be in terms of what impairments, it's a legal concept, they have, and what the medical legal statuses of that patient. We're not allowed to treat the patient. I mean, we can make recommendations, but we cannot give that patient any treatment whatsoever. It's a different role.
So as you can tell, Dr. Weil really knows his stuff, right?
Yeah.
He's been in the system. He knows his game. He knows what it takes to be there for the injured worker, both as a QME and a treating physician. And, not every doctor can just go be a QME. It takes certain education requirements. You have to actually have a license and things like that. And, what better than hear it from the man himself? So let's take a listen to what Dr. Weil had to say.
To become a qualified medical examiner, one has to treat workman's compensation in this state. And then there's a test. You have to apply and take a test, and then you get a license. That's pretty much it. For a psychologist and certain other things, we're not a psychologist. I'm basically an orthopedic doctor. But for a psychologist, they have to have been a psychologist for 5 years. But other than that, it's pretty. And then every couple of years, one has to take courses to update. And CISMS actually gives credit for that. For keeping up to date with workmen's compensation issues, workmen's compensation law, and various language of art.
One of the questions that I had to ask Dr. Weil, which was a question that we often talk about a lot in the podcast, was the importance of knowing who that doctor is. Remember, we've talked about, there's doctors that are treating very famous athletes in Bay Area teams, such as Warriors, such as the Niners, such as the Raiders, that do also potentially see an average injured worker. I'm not saying that, just because they're athletes, they're not average, but it's just like you can still get a really great doctor if you know that doctor's names. Now, I wanted to confirm this, and who better than to ask the doctor? So I did have an idea to kind of just throw in there like, hey, do you really need to know that doctor? And this is what Dr. Weil had to say in regards to the importance of knowing the doctor who you're going to essentially treat you for your injuries.
In fact, workman's compensation, the more familiar the doctor that's treating you is with workman's compensation, the better outcome you're likely to have. A lot of times insurance companies like to guide patients to an occupational medicine clinic, but an occupational medicine clinic, in terms of treatment, they want you to be done, and they will treat you quickly, maybe 6 sessions of physical therapy and a little bit of Motrin, and they're expecting you to get back to work. And while that works for some people, it doesn't work for a more significant injury or a more prolonged injury, and these injuries can be chronic and tricky. And but their objective is to end the case, because occupational medicine clinics generally, the reason they're called occupational medicine clinics is because they have contracts with employers and insurance companies, and that's basically who they are, who their real clients are.
I didn't even know QMEs couldn't treat, injured workers. I thought a qualified medical evaluator was essentially going to just kind of go over what you need and then help you, right? It wasn't until we actually got to meet Dr. Weil where, we did ask him, how often, more so than not, do people think of this perspective as well, that a QME is actually going to treat them? And this is what he had to say.
So when somebody comes for qualified medical examination, the worker basically cannot make the appointment themselves most of the time. And if they're represented by an attorney, the parties, the attorney and the carrier agree on the appointment, or the carrier sets the appointment if they're not represented. And so it's a separate kind of appointment. But obviously this is very confusing to somebody that's doing it for the first time. And so probably 80% of people come for a qualified medical evaluation thinking that they're going to get their injury treated. And while, again, I can make recommendations, and usually very good recommendations, to help them and tell them things, I'm not allowed to actually treat an injury when I'm in the role of a qualified medical examiner.
Yeah, so it's incredibly important to know the doctor you're going to, right? Just like you said, there's a lot of fantastic physicians who are treating warriors, they're orthopedic surgeons. There's chiropractors we work with who treat the 49ers, things like that. There's also doctors and providers on the other side that are terrible. Oof. And, you kind of have to know who's who. It's not in the doctor's interests to really care about that as a doctor. They're there to see the patient. As the lawyers, though, we really want to make sure that we're pairing the injured worker with the right doctor so that they can really get the care they need and be with someone who's really a patient advocate. And not only a patient advocate, but one with good experience who's going to give them the best possible outcome, because that's bare minimum what they deserve.
Again, I am beyond excited that we even had the opportunity to dive into this event itself, because one would not think, we mentioned this in the beginning of the podcast, they don't intertwine. Like, doctors are doctors, lawyers are lawyers. But the way this podcast came about, the way this event happened, it just comes to show the importance of being connected. And I'm going to throw it out there because there has been shade thrown to lawyers because they say, oh, you're favoriting one doctor over the other, or you're connected with this doctor, therefore you're making more money, or you are wanting me to fail just like my doctor. But at the end of the day, in the worlds of doctors, in the worlds of lawyers, there's good ones and there's bad ones. When you work as an attorney and you start working with the good doctors, obviously you're catering your injured worker and you're kind of gearing them to like, hey, not to say these are my favorite doctors, but these are the doctors we've worked with in the past. And it's always been great working with them. That's so important. And this podcast proves that point, that it's not necessarily you choosing or getting money over it. It's just there's good people and there's bad people. I wouldn't say bad. Bad is like a really strong word.
There's quality. There's good lawyers. There's bad lawyers. It's not that they're evil. Maybe they're, not so great at what they do. But the same thing goes for any profession, whether you're talking about school teachers, police officers, janitors, lawyers, doctors, judges, politicians. There's just because they're a physician doesn't mean they're always going to be top notch, the best in the world. There's that. If anyone wants to listen to a great podcast besides ours, even though ours is the best, Dr. Death, right? You had that surgeon. He was a neurosurgeon out of Texas, and he butchered 20-something people. He paralyzed and killed, I think, 4 people. And he was, by all accounts, a great doctor on paper. It turned out he's a crazy murderer with a drug problem.
A psycho.
And so, to some extent, our experience in lawyers over the past, me personally, decade in workers' comp is I know a lot of these people. I know who's, as do a lot of other lawyers at my firm. And we know how to shuffle people around to the right physicians, not because it's about getting the most money for the person, but it's because there's a level of trust.
Right.
And that we know if we send someone to a medical provider's office, like Boomerang Health, which was formerly IPM and Comprehensive Spine and Sport, which Dr. Navani and Dr. Weil both are there for, we know that they're going to get good care.
Right.
We know that the forms are going to be filled out right, that the requests for authorization are going to actually make it to the insurance adjuster on time. There's continuity of care both from the doctor and the back office that make it a great medical group to work with for the injured worker and
Right.
help ensure they are getting the best shot possible to getting the care they need. And then at the end of the day, yeah, if the care doesn't help, then we know they're actually going to get a fair permanent disability rating and that the money they get does actually equate to what their level of disability actually is.
Correct. Well, I'm glad we had the opportunity to dive into this podcast. Again, it was a little bit different. I hope you guys actually enjoyed it. I hope you guys are excited as we are. And moving forward for 2023, I do believe we are going to be showcasing and introducing more doctors, more experts, and just getting an insight in the reality of what happens behind the scenes of workers' comp. We really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for diving into this. Thank you for inviting me to the event. It really does allow us to continue to share more educational videos and really go into depth into some of the things that otherwise would not be put out there for injured workers. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast, share the podcast, and if you have questions, dump them on the comments. We'll be more than happy to answer them. I know the doctors had a special message for the injured workers as well. We can share that now, but before, let's share what your last words are for today's podcast.
Yeah, so, CISMS was a great organization, and they invited me to come speak. I was on a traumatic brain injury panel with a former NHL player and another fantastic physician, Dr. Maureen Miner. And it was a great opportunity to be there and help play a role in educating the doctors on some of the legal concepts in workers' comp. And, I hope they invite me back. It was a pleasure to be there. And, a lot of the feedback and questions I got were really good. And so I felt like I was able to do my part and help out in the community. So
it felt really good. So this is what the doctors had to say. If there was one last word they could share to the injured workers. And with this, we'll leave you guys off and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
And is there anything you'd like to say to all the injured workers out there?
Well, hi, we're integrated pain medicine management, and we treat, and it's a very maze-like structure, workers' compensation, and if you have a complicated injury, it's good to get an attorney.
Awesome. Cool. Anything else you'd like to say to all the injured workers out there?
Well, stay strong. It's not an easy process. I know it's really hard to be injured and then to deal with workers' compensation system, but we are here for you. And, let's do this together. Let's get you better and let's get you back. We got your back.